You want to swing wildly at the internet like you've got the new pill in your hand, but you keep getting dead battered. Find the movement you want with NordVPN. They are our protection against terrifying cyber threats and wide-battered geo-blocks. NordVPN will help you get through any rights restrictions so you can watch all the cricket you want. We aren't always happy with the wickets we're on. Sometimes we need a change. NordVPN can switch your virtual location so your IP address is ready to cash in. So if you need to get around the internet's rules, or I suppose in our case laws, select NordVPN. They can help you watch a game on a cheaper stream in another country. Give NordVPN the ball and let them penetrate all your vast internet issues. Because if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can also receive a 20-gigabyte daily data voucher. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a big hitter is coming for you at nordvpn.com/KIMBER right now.
Name and job title, please.
So I'm Aaron Briggs, and I have a PhD in the aerodynamics of swing bowling, and I currently work as a data analyst in cricket, mainly for the ECB.
So you're not going to be shocked at this. Anytime there's a nerd in cricket, right? Someone will say, "Oh, have you talked to this other nerd?" Right?
Yeah.
And no, I'm not saying that you're the nerd here. I don't know why you're smiling.
No. I embrace that title very much, though. Don't worry.
And I remember someone just saying to me, "There's a guy who's cut a cricket ball in half." And he's weighing both sides of the ball, and and they were trying to go through all the and I'm not very good at it as well, but they were saying things like chronometer and all this sort of stuff at me with a straight face, where clearly they didn't know what they were talking about. But that's how I first heard of you. How did you make your way into cricket?
Right. So as I said at the start, I have a PhD, which is essentially in experimental engineering, but funded by the ECB and in swing bowling. So I kind of took the long route into cricket. I was actually post-finishing university. I did a physics degree, and I was in New Zealand on a bit of a post-university tour, I was watching England play New Zealand at the time. And I saw a job advert that the ECB put out saying, "Do you want to do a PhD in the aerodynamics of swing bowling?" And kind of read the job title, and I'd done a bit of fluid mechanics in the past. And I was like, well, this sounds great. I'm a cricket nerd. I'm out in New Zealand watching, playing. I spend most of my time watching, looking at stats, etc. Why not give it a go? I'm an experimental physicist. What could go wrong? So I applied for that at the Whittle Lab in Cambridge, and I luckily got the position. And I had 2 great supervisors in Sam and Nick, Sam Grimshaw, I'll give them a shout out because they're still doing awesome work. But the whole lab was essentially a turbo machinery lab. So they researched jet engines, and I was this weird black sheep in the corner who was a physicist, not an engineer, just doing cricket balls in the corner. So I had my little wind tunnel, which is how we did all our testing. And so I did that for 4 years. Amazing. Was in contact with the ECB throughout. So they would send us research questions and other bits to research, and we'd present our findings as a research team throughout the sort of 3 or 4 years. And then when I finished, there was a bit of a job opening within the performance analysis department as a kind of data analyst. And I thought, well, what's the point of doing a PhD in this if you can't make a bit of a way in the industry? So I did that alongside some research and teaching, and I've slowly sort of tried to upskill myself in terms of being useful in the cricket industry rather than just someone who knows a lot about swing bowling. So I've been doing that for finished in 2023, so nearly 3 years now, and it's been great. It's been really enjoyable.
So they ask you questions, which I'm going to assume a bunch of those questions I'm just going to ask you today as well.
Quite possibly, yeah.
When do you get... So the wind tunnel stuff, people have done the wind tunnel stuff before you as well.
Yep.
There had been other things as well. How much of this is you just trying to answer the questions of the ECB and cricket coaches and people within the game? And how much of this is, I've got all these different tools. How would they help me learn more about this art?
Well, I mean, the idea of a PhD project is very much the latter, right? Like we have a problem that we don't fully understand as a collective as in human race, So the idea of a PhD is you do novel research that no one's kind of done before. And in engineering, you often get interesting sort of problems that come to you that allow you to research stuff in a lot of detail. So as you say, there'd been wind tunnel studies done before. There's a research group out of Bath doing stuff. So a few guys in in the sort of 70s and 80s really cracked the majority of it. But there's still these unanswered questions that people hadn't been able to put their finger on the answer. You know, again, things about atmospheric conditions and reverse swing and the old ball in particular. So it was kind of a bit of both. And that's why it really appealed to me, was a chance to do something new and interesting, but also have an impact in the game. It wasn't just blue sky research. It really fed into something that I cared about. And that was really cool. So yeah, there were times we sort of had little sprints where we'd get a problem and then we have to try and solve it. But in general, the idea was take the problem of swing bowling, break it down using as good engineering principles as you can. So break it down into its constituent parts, test all of them to as much detail as you've got time to, and then stitch it all back together with some sort of unified theory of how everything works. And that was kind of the plan. I think we did a pretty good job of it. I won't tell anyone to go and read the thesis. It's 250 pages of fairly dry academic reading, but we do have a fun paper out that kind of looks at everything that's been done on swing bowling and then says what bits are done well and what bits aren't. And that's reasonably approachable for anyone who is interested enough to spend a bit of time reading into this. So yeah, that was kind of the idea.
What year did your paper come out?
Last year, I think, about just under a year ago, possibly. So.
And when did you start?
So my PhD was 2018 through till 2022. So it was basically bang on 4 years over the lockdown.
There's a reason I asked this, because you and I both know that 2017, if you want to be technical, is basically when the wobble ball takes over. So you're looking at swing bowling, and as you're doing this incredible research, the game is literally evolving beyond the thing that you're doing. Was there any time where you're just like, by the time I finish this, will anyone actually be bowling swing bowler?
It's fine. Jimmy was still playing, so like that was my main thing. He's such an amazing example, because obviously he's the best person to ever do it, and then his longevity allows you such an amazing data set to look at. So when I was doing tests in the lab, I'd always have this very, very good example to compare the lab test with in the real world. And so, yeah, I think while Jimmy was there, I still always had an amazing hope that what I was going to do was going to change the way everyone thought about it. But you're right. Yeah, there's, the game has changed. What has been really nice is tracking how the way some of the games has changed. And in fact, white ball cricket has not always been very swing dominated. But actually recently, since probably 2019 onwards, there's been an increase in the amount of swing that's been bowled in both T20 and ODI cricket. Swing and seam movement's gone up. And that was a really interesting thing to track and try and work out some of the reasons why. One of the things we did as one of the sprints during the PhD was look at white ball cricket leading into the 2019 World Cup, which was one of the funnest things I did during my PhD, was like, how can we extract more swing from a white ball? And how can we use that in some sort of competitive advantage moving forward in white ball cricket? So I think the game always ebbs and flows. At the moment we've got people talking about how everyone's just a bowling machine and batting is dominating everything, but I don't think that's always going to be the case, and swing bowling might come out of fashion, and then there might be something that brings it back into fashion, whatever that is. So I'm still optimistic that it's not a completely dying art, at least, and I will have some relevance, fingers crossed, as the game evolves.
Let's just go back. So as I said, the first thing I heard about was someone's cutting a ball in half, and this is a big thing. And I think after you did that, and you probably already had passed that information on about the balls changing, essentially I then wrote the article saying, you can see in the data here that Kookaburra have changed the balls. And and there was enough news articles out there, even though Kookaburra wouldn't talk to me. When you did that, it wouldn't have been the first ball that you would have ever cut open. You would have cut open many balls before to try and check them out, because it's a thing that people do in other sports as well, right? Like trying to work out balance and everything else. When you cut the Kookaburra ball open and you realized it was slightly different before, like, is that like you want to go and tell the guys in the jet rocket area, like, you have no idea. Look, this has never been in a cricket ball before. Like, how excited are you at that point?
So it's interesting. So I think a kind of bit of background for this is the way we kind of structured the project was, I think when you're looking at swing bowling, there's kind of like three main areas that kind of contribute to a ball swinging. So it's kind of the idea when we structurally broke down the project, it was to look at everything related to the bowler to begin with, right? So if you think about the factors that the bowler is in control of, so the speed that the ball's delivered at, the seam position, the wobble seam, things like that. So we kind of categorize those as bowler factors. The second one is then the ball, obviously. So cricket balls come in a variety of shapes and sizes, brands, colors, ages, roughnesses, seam heights, all the different factors related to the ball itself. And then the last one was the atmospherics. So the idea of looking at the air that the ball is traveling through, how that changes based on weather conditions, locations in the world, altitude, for example, and kind of then piecing those things together. So when we're thinking about the ball itself, we go back to the 2019 pre-World Cup, and then we looked at the white kookaburra balls. And one of the things we found essentially is that the majority of the reason that a white ball stopped swinging is mainly to do with the ball. The kookaburras themselves, the way at least they were designed back in 2019, the biggest thing you'd find is that the quarter seams would split open. So I think I've got a white ball here. I've also got my props ready. So those who don't know what a quarter seam is, hopefully you can see that's a bit bright. But down the middle, my lamp's a bit bright. Down the middle of the ball, essentially, I'm going to turn this over so you can see it. So down the middle of the ball, you have the primary seam and then the quarter seam, which kind of runs down the middle here. And so when this ball gets smacked around in white ball cricket, that splits open. And you can have a ball that's as shiny as you like, but if the quarter seam is split open, it's going to stop it swinging. And we could see that in the lab. One of the things we did that was really cool was use infrared imaging. So we looked at the ball using an infrared camera, made the ball cold, looked at the airflow around the ball, and then we could see the reasons why it would and wouldn't swing. So we kind of identified the white ball as being a bit of a problem child, as it were, leading into the 2019 World Cup. And then I remember very clearly being sat in the lab during lockdown. I was one of the only people back in the lab doing testing, and I was watching England play Sri Lanka in a T20 game. And Chris Wokes was swinging the ball after about 14 overs. And I was like, what is going on here? This is not something I would expect from everything I know about swing bowling and white ball cricket. This shouldn't be happening. Something has changed here. And again, when considering those three factors, well, I know what Chris Wokes is in terms of a swing bowler. I know what he does and what he doesn't do well. He's not going to have massively changed since his bowling performances in 2019. And then the atmospherics were never going to change enough to make a white ball swing at 14 overs. So it must be something to do with the ball. And that's where you start going, well, what's changed here? You start getting your saw out, chopping the ball open, trying to test them as much as you can. And yeah, that's, you talked about the ball changing and that being a thing that then caused more swing and seam and the loss of runs. And that's kind of when we found it out, was like, oh, wow, I saw something in a game that I wouldn't expect. Let's go explore this in any way we can. So that was kind of the process leading up to dropping balls in half, seeing what's in them. And then since then, obviously, we've had discussions around the ball in Australia and the new kookaburra and all those other things. And you're right, the kookaburra themselves often don't tell you a lot. But, that's just part and parcel of the game. So that's kind of how the whole thing came about. And then, as I say, since then, we've seen an increase in swing and seam in white ball cricket. And then, left arm bowlers become the prize commodity, swing bowlers become the prize commodity in the IPL, the game shifts, swing comes back in and out of play. So, yeah, that's kind of the story behind that. It definitely wasn't the first ball I chopped in half, but probably the most exciting one to see that something is different and that it is having a visible impact in the game in a way that my research kind of told me that it would, which was cool.
So let's just very, very basically, a brand new cricket ball swings partly. I correct me on any terminology that I might have wrong, but essentially the seam acts a little bit like a rudder. And yeah, is that wrong? It's not a rudder. Yeah. Isn't the right term, is it? There's another term.
I personally, I can do my little spiel of why a cricket ball swings. I mean, I wouldn't have got through 4 years of PhD without having this kind of idea. So the main idea is that you're trying to get different airflow on either side of the ball. That's what makes a ball swing. And then by airflow on either side, the technical term is boundary layer. So the air really close to the surface of the ball. It's called a boundary layer in aerodynamic terms. So if we're thinking about a brand new ball where we've got two shiny sides, right? The ball's new and shiny. What we're trying to do is generate different airflow on either side. And so if I angle the seam, say I'm bowling right arm away swing to you, what happens now is the air will hit the ball at the front here. And then as it moves around this side, which is the shiny side, the airflow basically stays clean, or the technical term is laminar. So you have laminar flow on one side, and then the air gets to about this point here, and it leaves the ball, so sort of stays attached for a certain amount of time and then comes off. On the other side, the air will hit the ball at the front, and as it comes around this side, it hits this big, rough, raised seam. And that's obviously going to generate dirty air or turbulent air, which again is the kind of technical term. Laminar and turbulent is clean and dirty. And that actually makes the air stick to the ball on this side for longer. So you have the air sticking to one side for longer, leaving early. That kicks the air out to the right, my right-hand side here. And then sort of Newton's third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The ball will then swing to the left. So if you angle the seam to the slips.
But just to go back on what you just said, because you said the shiny side, but a brand new ball doesn't have a shiny side because it has two shiny
Right.
sides. So what I really wanted to know is, does it swing slightly differently with a brand new ball than it does with a ball 2 or 4 overs?
Yes, yeah. So there are some
thought.
sort of nuances and differences with this. But going back to the idea of a rudder, right? So the reason I don't necessarily like the term rudder is, if you think about a boat, the rudder is literally pushing the air to one side. It's a physical block that's moving the air. That's not what the seam does. The seam itself doesn't move the air. It changes how the air sticks to the ball, and then that causes the air to move, and then the ball swings. So
perfect.
As much as sort of the imagery of a rudder is very similar, it's not quite, again, I couldn't have done a PhD without being quite pedantic around the sort of terminology.
No. That's why I knew you'd correct me on the word. I was using the word that is used the most in sort of non-PhD cricket circles. So we've got the ball. Humans, yeah. So you've got the shiny side, and then you've got the slightly rougher side. So let's say for the first 2 overs, it will just swing because it's a brand new ball. And it's shiny on both sides. Then it becomes shiny on one side, which is quite often why it swings a little bit more later on than it does for the first over or 2. Well, the white ball is different then.
Yeah, so there's a slight misconception around some of the new ball versus a slightly older ball. So as I said before, you use the seam to generate the different airflow on either side. Obviously, if you make one side rough, you can then use the surface of the ball to generate different airflow on either side. So one of the things people talk about a new ball possibly not swinging is because often a new ball is not actually that smooth. So again, you look at cricket balls here, it's a bit bright, but you've got logos, you've got quarter seams, you have other features on the ball that actually aren't necessarily that smooth. I sort of challenge everyone to find the newest ball they've got and run their finger over the logos and the quarter seams. If you've got any, you can feel the roughness, right? I can feel that this one's got a bit of a lump in the middle. Any of the logos, they're often quite indented. So you'll see
they're stamped on, aren't they?
Yeah. So the way the ball is made, which again is something not that many people spend a lot of time looking at, but is you have a leather that is then dyed or painted, and then it is lacquered on top, and then the logo is kind of the last thing that's stamped on top of it. And so actually, I have very cool here. I have something we got during my PhD, some Duke's balls that have no logos on them, which are just the most beautiful thing. For someone like me, this is incredibly shiny, lovely ball. I think any bowlers out there would be happy to grab one of these. But the lack of logo means this thing is incredibly smooth. And so often when people talk about getting the lacquer off the ball to get a new ball swinging, often you're trying to get rid of those imperfections that the brand new ball has on them. You're trying to polish out the logos. You're trying to smooth out the crusty bits of lacquer that are on there. And then that allows you to have that perfectly smooth surface. So actually having a ball with 2 shiny sides and perfectly smooth on both sides, that's pretty much the best condition you can have a ball in. One thing that's really interesting from the research we did is that when you start making one side rough, you actually get less swing. So if you have the ball like this and you can angle the seam and swing the ball with 2 shiny sides, that's the optimal condition. As soon as you start roughing up one side, actually the ball swings less. And so one of the things, my sort of key takeaways that people don't necessarily think of as an option is you shine both sides of the ball. That's like my one real little hint that I give to people as a really easy win for conventional swing is just keep both sides shiny. There's kind of twofold for that. One, it swings more. So if you have a ball with 2 shiny sides, it swings more than one with a rough side and a shiny side. And then also you just have 2 shiny sides. So if the ball gets smashed into the fence and you get a big scuff out of your shiny side, well, you flip the ball over, you have another one. So you only need 1 shiny side, but kind of 2 is optimal. So that's something that I've been trying to drill into people, whether at club cricket that I play with or any coaches or pros that I talk to, is just shine both sides of the ball. If all you care about is conventional swing, shine both sides because that's the best thing. And then, as I say, getting the lacquer off the ball and the logos is kind of what gets you to that optimal Duke's ball 5-10 overs in.
But it still swings when one side is rough and one side is smooth. Does that swing? That still swings the exact same way, or is it swinging in a slightly different way?
So again, with the shiny side, you still have the laminar flow on one side, and then when you're bowling conventional swing, you always put the rough side on the same side as the seam, right? Because you need this one shiny side, and so when the air hits the seam, you have both the seam and the surface roughness both contributing to generating turbulent flow on one side of the ball. So it's the same idea. The seam kind of dominates the surface roughness for a long time. Seams are quite chunky. They're pretty big in terms of the scale of the ball getting rough. But obviously that kind of changes when you get to an old ball and you can't keep a shiny side and you want to get into reverse swing, which is a slightly different mechanism. But again, same idea of generating different airflow on either side of the ball.
Okay, so that kind of goes against what the traditional idea is if you read about swing, which is that you want one side of the ball to be lighter than the other. And so the roughness makes it lighter or heavier, depending on whether it's conventional swing or reverse swing. So the reverse swing then works in a different way than conventional swing?
So just to address the like heaviness and lightness concept, because again, that's a thing you hear quite a lot. That to me is an example that one just doesn't really hold much water when you think about it. So if you consider having one side that's heavy and one side's light, well, gravity is a force that acts downwards, right? So if you had a ball that was heavier on one side, it would tilt. So it wouldn't swing sideways. It's not the weight that is going to be causing the ball to move sideways. And also, again, when you kind of run the numbers in terms of how much weight difference, what force that would give you compared to how much force you see on a swinging ball, like it's nowhere near. You're never going to be able to generate significant force by creating a weight imbalance. So that one to me is just something that's never really worked. The trade-off is the way that people get a ball like that is they make one side really polished. They load one side, make it as polished as possible, and then they let the other side get really, really rough. And that's how reverse swing works. You go from using the seam to create laminar flow on one side, the shiny side, and kind of turbulent induced flow on the other, to instead, when you can no longer have a shiny side, you still need another way of creating this different airflow on either side. So it turns out what's really interesting is when you make a ball really, really, really rough on one side, it goes from, I talked about how far the air stays attached to the ball, so it kind of sticks to it. So when it's perfectly smooth, it kind of separates about in the middle of the ball. Then as it gets rougher, it moves to the back of the ball. And then it gets even rougher, it starts moving forward again. So this amazing curve that you have in aerodynamics, which is basically where the air stays attached to the ball versus how rough it is. And it goes flat, 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 and then it drops off a cliff, and then it starts to climb back up again the other side. So for reverse swing, what you actually want is a really, 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 really rough side, and then a side that's less rough on the other side. So what you have now is incredibly turbulent flow that separates right in the middle, and then slightly turbulent flow that separates towards the back of the ball, kicks the air in the opposite direction to conventional swing, and the ball moves in now. So it's a really cool aerodynamic phenomenon because it only really occurs within a certain speed range. And that speed range just happens to be where we play cricket. So there's a thing I always say, like if everyone bowled at 150 miles an hour, you'd never see conventional swing. If everyone bowled at 60 miles an hour, you'd never see reverse swing. We're just really lucky that we exist in the right size of ball, the right roughness, the right speed, that we get conventional swing, reverse swing, and then this bit in the middle where it's kind of all messed up. So those are kind of the two bookends.
You know what I'm going to ask next?
Yeah.
Then why do we need to spit on the ball?
So that's the idea of creating this like contrast, right? So, you're trying to keep your one side shiny as possible, and then as soon as it gets scuffed up, well, how do we make the ball shiny? But that's early on.
That's for a new ball, right? Yeah. So for a new red ball, it makes a lot of sense to spit on a ball or you sweat on one side because you want to make the ball shiny on one side. But you've just said for reverse swing,
the rough side's more important. Yeah. So actually, it's not.
So why are they spitting on the other side? Is my question. And does saliva do anything?
It's one of these things that everyone thinks the shiny side is important, but actually, again, when you look at the test, the ball with a really, really, really rough side reverses much more than a ball with a really, really, really smooth side, right? So actually, when you're looking at getting reverse swing, it's more important to get the rough side really roughed up than it is to shine the shiny side. So it's one of these things that people are doing stuff, but possibly for not necessarily the right reasons. So you're trying to create this contrast, but actually you should be focusing on the rough side, getting that as rough as possible. Putting saliva on the shiny side is probably a few percent. If you can't make the rough side rough, you're not going to get any reverse. So how much time you spend putting sweat, saliva, whatever it is, on the other side is probably a losing cause by that point.
So I do a podcast with Robbie Utapa, and he said that 20 over cricket, they mostly try and load the ball. Yeah. So he's literally saying, trying to get sweat, saliva, and everything on. If you look at, Wisden did a piece on this. I think they put it on the TV today, that there's been more reverse swing this year than last year. And they're putting that
only
down
in
to
the
the
first
saliva.
Innings. It's only in the first innings as well.
Yeah, because the second innings, the balls are quite often replaced. So we can't look at the second innings as much because of the new dual rules. So it is only in the first innings, but that is the first innings that is most. It's worth saying, though, that a lot of people who are doing this are comparing it to last year's swing. if you go back to 2023, it's a very similar rate of reverse swing without any saliva, which makes me question everything.
There's a lot of small sample sizes in this, and so another thing that when you're measuring swing, this is another kind of battle that I like to fight, is that the standard way we measure swing is with like degrees of swing. That's the measurement you'll see on the TV, the same measurement used in Wisdom. And the real problem with measuring degrees of swing is that everyone in cricket knows if you pitch the ball up, it swings more. Swing is an inherently length-dependent phenomenon, right? The longer the ball is in the air, the more time it has to swing, the further it will swing. So if you plot degrees of swing against just length, then the fuller you ball, the more degrees of swing you get. So if you're using that as a measurement, you inherently have to take length into account. And again, the Wisdom article is good. It split balls up into fuller than 6 meters and shorter than 6 meters, but that's still a really, really big range of lengths. If you just bowl Yorkers, right? If you're bowling 20 meters from 18-ish meters from the release of the ball to the base of the stumps, just doing that consistently, your swing numbers will go through the roof because the ball's just got more time in the air if you're just looking at degrees of swing. So I talk about how you measure swing better, but one of the biggest things is like you have to normalize for the length that's bowled. It could just be this year, I personally haven't looked at the numbers, it could just be that everyone's bowling Yorkers this year. As soon as you bowl Yorkers, you get a high degree of swing. And
why would they be bowling Yorkers is my theory, is they're bowling Yorkers.
Right? So there's this whole...
But I think that because they believe that saliva works, I think they're bowling more Yorkers. And because they're bowling more Yorkers, we're seeing more swing because we're not seeing as many slower balls this year. It's really obvious. Right. And the other thing that you talked about before was also there are going to be years when we're going to have more swing and less swing. That's going to have nothing to do with the ball. It's going to have to do with the kind of bowlers that are being picked. Yep. Sam Curran doesn't swing the ball anymore because he doesn't try and swing it anymore. It's not because it's a completely different delivery he has. And so what we were trying to do, so we've been trying to do like an upgraded version of what Wisdom did, which is look at 128 kilometers plus, looking at 4 meters plus, and really try and do it. But even within that, we know that there might be some slower balls in there, and there might be some balls that are cross seam on purpose, right? Like we don't know.
So there's 2 points in there that really are kind of the big things that I think about a lot when I'm thinking about swing bowling. The first one is that there is so much bowler intent that leads to a certain end result. So if a bowler doesn't try and swing the ball is not going to swing. I talked about those kind of 3 buckets before: the bowler factors, the ball, and the conditions. How it kind of works in that is if any one of those 3 things isn't working properly, the ball doesn't swing. You need all 3 of those things lined up. You need a ball that's in a good condition, you need the bowler to be nailing their skills, and then you need the conditions not to be destroying your chance of swing, right? So as soon as the bowler decides, I'm not going to try and swing the ball, you can't swing it. And so you kind of sometimes get into this self-fulfilling prophecy idea where I talk to people about this before, that when the clouds come out, bowlers go, oh, it's going to swing, I'm going to try and swing the ball now. They try and swing the ball and it does swing. But if they weren't trying to swing the ball before because the clouds weren't out. And it's exactly the same thing with this reversing. Oh, the ball's not going to reverse. Well, I won't try and bowl my Yorkers then. Now I think it is going to reverse. I'm going to bowl my Yorkers and then I'll see that. So there's always this kind of cyclical nature of, I kind of talk about like perception is reality, right? Like if you think something's going to happen and you nail your skills, then it is going to happen. And so that's kind of the first point on that. The second point, what were we talking about before? The like working out if a ball has been bowled cross seam or anything else. So there is a massive gap in cricket in understanding bowler technique. So a real classic example is, I came to the ECB and we talked about, characterizing swing bowlers, and I remember getting asked the question, what makes Jimmy so good as a swing bowler? And he nails his seam position much better than everyone else does. He can invert his wrist, bowl an in swing or an away swing, bowl a wobble seam, excellent control. Do I have any data on that? No, none at all. I have no information of how many times Jimmy Anderson angled his seam away from the batter, how many times he angled it in. All I have is what actually happened, whether the ball swung or not. There's no information on what the seam position was, how much wobble there was on the ball, how much rotation there was. We have speeds, which is important. Swing is a speed-dependent phenomenon, but we don't have this bowler technique information. So you're absolutely right. How are we meant to assess if reverse swing has gotten greater based on this one factor, putting saliva on the ball, if we can't measure any of the other factors that are massively important? And so it's one of the things I've been trying to push for with my small sphere of influence is trying to record bowler technique better. And we talked a little bit before about baseball, for example, and you look at the amount of things that are tracked in baseball in terms of seam position, orientation, rotation rate, rotation axis, all these amazing things, and it's contributed to this explosion in pitch design, which is the same thing as, you know, designing variations, where pitchers can now tweak the smallest parts of their pitching strategy and see the effect on the motion it gets them in terms of break and cut and the other things that are equivalent to swing and dip in our game. And we just don't have any of that in cricket. It just doesn't exist, either from a practice perspective or in game. So it makes trying to put a pin on what's the reason for something happening really difficult when you just can't control or measure any of the other variables. So I'm very, very hesitant to do the one-to-one correlation of saliva on the ball equals more reverse, just because I can't disprove that it's something else. As much as my idea is as well that the rough side is more important. So that kind of from a science perspective. But yeah, that's a massive thing you're struggling with.
You are anti-spit. That's it. It's that we've all heard it now.
I personally don't think spit is any more or less effective than sweat as well, and slightly more hygienic, despite you know, the weirdness that it is putting bodily fluids on the ball we use. But yeah,
I'd love to see you in the lab just spitting on balls.
Thankfully, there's nothing. I never had to do any of that. I never had to take a bite out of it. Wasn't ball tampering stuff either. So thankfully that was all good. But yeah, so and again, so with white balls as well.
Yep. Sorry, go.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so with white balls as well, the way they're designed and made, I said before, you have a ball where the leather is like dyed. In the white ball case, it's bleached and it's painted. And when a white ball, anyone who's used a white ball knows that you can't really repair it in the same way that you repair a red ball. You can't shine it. So the way you
the leather doesn't smooth over because it's because of the paint.
Yes. There's no grease in the ball. So a red ball is dyed and then it's greased, and that grease is to protect it from water. It's why the Duke's balls themselves are so good at shining, because they're designed to be used in England where it's wet. A high quality Duke's ball will last a lot longer in a wet English conditions than a Kookaburra does, because it's got more grease in the ball. It's designed to be protected against that. Dukes also have like a West Indies spec ball that has less grease and more lacquer, and they tune those things based on the conditions. So with a red ball, you dissolve that grease with your sweat, your saliva, whatever it is, and then you polish that into the rest of the ball, like polishing a pair of shoes. You apply some surface finish, you get more grease on it, and you polish it, you buff it up, you shine it. Can't do that with a white ball or a pink ball because they're painted. You can't dissolve the paint, you can't repair them. And so again,
so the pink ball, why does the pink ball last longer than the white ball? Is it just because it's not bleached? Like, what's the difference?
It doesn't last much longer. I think it often lasts longer because it's not getting smashed to the fence every third ball.
So you don't think we should replace the one day ball with a pink ball?
I don't think it would make much difference at all in terms of the swing factor, at least. No,
not swing. I just more meant can it get through 50 overs?
Oh, so the visibility question is not something that I'm necessarily qualified to answer.
No, not just visibility. I mean, so the pink ball is kind of made halfway between a red ball and a white ball. You can't get this color of pink just from dyeing it, so they have to do extra stuff. But it's not like the white ball where you can't dye it at all, right? No. So there is a. I'll look at us with our pink balls.
So mine's an old one, right? So what you can see, again, turn my lamp down a little bit so you can see. So I don't know if you can see this a bit. It kind of cracks. So you can see this one here. The surface cracks. It doesn't scuff like a red ball. I do have an old red. Got infinite cricket balls knocking around here again. Unsurprising. So
me too. I've got a whole bucket of them in front of me.
I can always the variety I've got over here is incredible as well. I've got some pink Dukes, some white ones. It's quite fun. So like a red ball, you can see this one here has been used and been polished up, right? So you can polish that. There's no cracking in the surface. When it does crack a bit, you can smooth it over and rub that grease into it. Can't do that with a pink ball. The surface cracks because it's heavily lacquered to maintain the visibility. So I don't think there would be much difference in replacing a white ball with a pink ball. It's still the same issue. It's not a red ball. You can't shine it in the same way. And again, if you look at the data, I know loads of people have done this on pink ball test matches where the ball swings quite a lot at the start, but it doesn't maintain itself. And then you get these big periods of the game where the ball isn't doing much and there's not a really prominent seam and you can't really scuff it up to reverse it that well. So in fact, people talk about pink ball test being a bowler's friend, but a lot of the time they aren't really. Just
it kind of goes between one or the other, doesn't it? It's either all wickets or no wickets in those games. Let's just talk about, we've talked about, you said you're anti-spit fine. You very
Sure.
briefly mentioned clouds.
Yes.
Are you willing to sit here and say what I've kind of believed for a very long time, which is the clouds don't play any part?
I'm so willing to put my hat straight on that. The cloud thing is probably the biggest myth in cricket, but I will caveat that with how I've come to that conclusion, right? I'm not just going to throw this out there and not give any background to it. So I talked before about atmospherics, and what we actually care about is the block of air that the ball's traveling through. So you imagine a cricket pitch, you have stumps at either end. The bowler is releasing the ball from 2.5 meters and some width of the crease, probably between plus or minus 1.5 meters either side of middle stump, and the pitch is 20 meters long. So you can imagine that cube of air that the ball is traveling through. That's the only thing that can change how a ball swings. I talked before about we care about the airflow close to the ball. The only thing that's going to affect that is the air that the ball is traveling through. And so there are conditions that are better and worse for swing for various reasons. Won't go into all of them here because it involves some fairly complicated fluid mechanics. But if you think about the clouds, they're all the way, up in the higher atmosphere. How are they actually going to affect the block of air that the ball travels through? There are a few theories that kind of float around. So one of the ideas is that the clouds themselves obviously impact how much sunshine and sunlight is getting on the pitch. And that has been theorized. A lot of sunlight on a pitch been caused to give kind of turbulence in the air, in the background air. So I think it's in the How Cricket Works. Nathan Lehman and Ben Jones's book, they talk about this, and we kind of investigated this idea without much conclusive evidence either way, or much evidence of it existing. But if you're thinking about conventional swing, I said before, you need to get clean air on one side and then the seam creates turbulent air on the other side. If the background air itself is not clean, if it contains a high level of turbulence, you can't get laminar flow on one side of the ball. You can't get clean versus dirty air. If the background air is dirty, you're going to get dirty air everywhere. And so you're not going to be able to get the different airflow on either side of the ball. So there are weather conditions that create background turbulence, background unsteadiness in the air. The biggest one being the wind. I think that's a parameter that people don't think about enough when it comes to swing. But the clouds themselves don't really affect that. I can foresee some possible example where it's 45 degrees in Australia and the pitch is a baked block of earth that is radiating heat, and you see a big heat haze coming off the pitch. When you see heat haze on the road, that is turbulence. You are seeing warm air rising off the pitch, and that creates some level of background unsteadiness that stops the ball swinging. But such a marginal edge case, it's never going to make a difference in the UK when temperatures are 15, 16 degrees most of the time when we're playing. And so it might be that the clouds themselves correlate to times when, for example, the wind is low. So low wind is low background unsteadiness, which is good for swing. You want some clean air to be able to bowl through. If the clouds are sat above you and not moving because there is no wind, well, that might be a good day for swing, but it's not the clouds themselves that are making any difference. And so it's a classic example of people wanting to put one-to-one correlations on things. Actually, you can blame Bob Massey. He's the guy. I quoted him in my thesis because he's the architect of all this nonsense, where he took, I think it was 9 wickets or something against Australia in the 50s, and gave a quote saying that the clouds were low and blue oyster hue in color. And it's amazingly poetic quote that's just stuck with people and resonated because this guy took 9 wickets one time and he said it was the clouds. So now that is embedded in cricket folklore. And again, it's a thing you can see. You can't really see the aerodynamics of what's happening around a cricket ball. You can't see the airflow. You need something to be able to point out and go, well, that's the reason. We do it in sport all the time. We do it in life all the time. We like to have one-to-one correlations of stuff. You can't go, we picked a rubbish ball out of the box that we haven't shined properly, or I'm not nailing my skills. But you can go, it's sunny, so it's never going to swing. And then as it gets into law, as I said before, when it's cloudy and people try and swing the ball, it swings more. So you get that self-fulfilling prophecy. So my biggest
I'm going to get my researchers now onto Bob Massey. So the match you're talking about, he took 16 wickets in the test match.
Right, great.
And I think he took 15. I'm just looking it up now because I love this fact. He took 15 wickets in the rest of his career in the next 5 games.
He is both my favorite person and my absolute nemesis at the same time. So
you should get the I don't know if you can grow handlebars, but he had incredible chopsticks on the side of his face. Just brilliant work. So the clouds one, I've kind of always thought that way, only because I watched my dad from a very young age until basically he couldn't walk, pick up a cricket ball in any situation and swing it. right? And there were
How
lots of
fast was he
hot
bowling
days.
as well, right? So he was probably bowling at what? No offense to anyone, but
No. Well, he was fast when he was
55 miles an
young,
hour?
but yeah, he would have been 50. Well, actually, probably 60, 65 miles
Sure,
an hour. I would have
and
thought.
at that speed, it's a lot easier to swing a ball than it is at 90 miles an hour.
Oh no. But you're right. But my point is, I don't remember anyone ever saying, "Oh, we can't bowl him because it's sunny." Like he would
Yeah.
bowl 45 overs when it was sunny, and in where I grew up, everyone bowled swing on hot days. And then it's become. It seems to, and it's interesting that you mentioned Massey because I feel like over the last few years, it's become more and more of a thing of like, oh, the clouds have come in, and I talked to cricket writers, and I've said. What do we think happens though? Like that there has to be actually something that changes. So that's good. Let's go to the other one, which is lights. I think I've seen you tweet about this before as well. And that my original thought was that the ball is when you're playing under lights, the ball is just harder to see, right?
You can't see it. Cricket is a game of perception and reaction time, and you can't see the ball as well under lights. So if it moves, you can't play it as well.
So if it swings the exact same amount, it's going to have a much bigger impact on you under lights than it would in the daytime.
Because your visibility is poorer. And there's a big thing about the twilight period as well in cricket. And if you think about what's happening with the pink ball, right, it goes from being something nice and dark in the daytime to something nice and bright in the evening. There's some point in the middle where it blends between the two and you can't really see the ball very well. So, the perception is reality thing again, where if people again think the ball is going to swing more under lights, they try and swing the ball more, and the batters are more tentative at playing this stuff. There's kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy. But again, there's no data to suggest that there's any more movement under lights at all. I mean, people have debunked this several times. I think Wisdom did an article on it last time there was a pink ball Ashes test or equivalent. It's almost certainly a reaction time thing and a perception that it's just quite hard to bat under lights. And when someone's bowling 95 miles an hour at you and swinging the ball, you've got to react to it, or in some way your brain has to process that information and it does it slower. Therefore, you're just going to be less effective. That's kind of always been my view on it. There's a couple of other sort of considerations as well. So if you're thinking about playing under lights, you play at nighttime. And one of the things that happens at nighttime is the air gets colder. So if you think about a cricket stadium, you're in the sun all day. There's nice warm air being generated. It's all flowing up into the atmosphere from the warm cricket basin. At night, well, suddenly the ground gets cold again, and now the air that's all in the cricket stadium is cold. And if you think about how airflow works, warm air rises, right? Well, if you have a big load of cold air sat in a stadium, it's got nowhere to go. That air is amazingly still. It has a very low level of background turbulence. It's pretty good for swing bowling. Having said all of that, my biggest takeaway on conditions and atmospherics is, again, if you go back to the three sort of pillars of swing, bowler, ball, and atmospherics, the atmospherics from everything I've done and researched is kind of the least important of those three. If you don't nail your skills, you're never going to swing the ball. If you can't shine the ball, you're never going to swing the ball. It's very rare that the atmospherics themselves stop the ball swinging. It's these kind of like marginal differences. It's kind of a second order effect, as it were. It's not a big primary concern. The majority of the time, if the ball is not swinging, it's going to be one of those first two things. Either someone's not nailing their skills, which again, we don't really measure very well, or the ball is not in a great condition, which again is really hard to measure from a analysis or journalism point of view. You aren't able to go onto the field and say, oh, let's take pictures of the ball. Sometimes you get a nice close up from when it gets hit to the fence, or spider cam will come down and look at it. And I'm one of those weirdos who pauses the TV at that exact moment and tries to work out exactly what's going on with the ball. But those are things that are hard to see and hard to look at. The clouds, the weather, they're universal. We can all experience them. We can all see them. We can all comment on them. And therefore it becomes a narrative that is just a lot easier to access than saying, well, actually, I don't think whoever it is has nailed their seam position for the last 5 overs, which is why it's not swinging.
And to go back on something you said before, when you were talking about it being still and that helping with swing bowling, is there an element then of it? I've always thought that the ball does swing a lot when you're bowling into the breeze, specifically into a heavy breeze. But for me, it always felt like it swung differently than it does on a still day.
Well,
I don't know if there's any
really interesting. So again, if you think about, I talked about bowling through a block of air, right? So when you're bowling a ball through a block of air. It's one of the reasons a wind tunnel works really well. Is when you're bowling a ball through air, it's exactly the same as keeping the ball still and blasting the air past it, right? There's kind of like a relativism concept. There's a reason in my lab I could just stick a ball in the wind tunnel and blast the air past it. I didn't need someone to come in and bowl 90 miles an hour every time I wanted to run a test. So if you think about bowling into the wind, well, suddenly that block of air is moving towards you now. So you kind of, what you essentially get is an increase in your bowling speed, effective bowling speed between your ball and the air. So say you're bowling at 70 miles an hour into a 10 mile an hour wind. Well, the ball is seeing that air coming past it at 80 miles an hour. And one of the things that you see from when you run the numbers on how swing is generated and how it works, it's proportional to how fast you bowl. The amount of force you generate is proportional to how fast the ball is traveling squared, actually. The trade-off with that is obviously if you bowl faster, the ball has less time in the air for it to swing. And so those two things actually cancel each other out. So often what you see is that the trajectory of swing is often very, very similar for bowlers of all speeds. So if you bowl, you look at the Hawkeye trajectories, they will look kind of the same shape. They're a parabola. But if you're bowling into the wind, your ball is effectively traveling faster into the wind, but it has less time to get to the other end than if you were actually bowling 80 miles an hour. So you do actually get more swing. You get an increase in the amount of force when you bowl into the wind. The trade-off with that, as I said earlier, it's harder to swing the ball at higher speeds. You need the ball to be shinier in order to maintain that clean airflow. As you increase the speed of your air, you need the ball to be shinier to maintain it as a clean laminar flow. So your slight trade-off is that sometimes if you bowl into the wind, you might be going over the point where you can keep the shiny side shiny, as it were, so you lose it. So it's an interesting trade-off where you want your swing bowler to bowl into the wind because you get more force generated in the ball, you get more shape. But at the same time, if you're too close to that cutoff point where you can't keep the ball swinging, then you might get no swing at all. So that's kind of the trade-off between the two of them.
The other question I had about different kinds of swing is, I think now, I originally thought that reverse swing worked differently in the air, as in it looks different than traditional swing. Whereas now what I think is it's the batters creating that illusion. And I think you might have commented on a short video I did the other day about essentially what happens is the batter sees the ball coming out the hand and their thought processes are automatically, this is going to swing away. And then they adjust to the fact it's swinging in, which makes it look like the swing in is later, whereas actually it's probably happening the same way. Have I explained that right? And is that kind of how you believe it?
That's a really good way of putting it. So I talk a bit about the perception is reality stuff. Again, the same idea that the ball feels like it's swinging more under lights because you react slower to it, right? It feels like it's doing more. You're like, oh God, that's moved loads, when actually it's moved the same. You just haven't reacted to it. The same thing kind of goes for reverse swing. Where the idea being that if you're not expecting the ball to swing and then it does, you're slower to react to it. And the other thing with reverse as well it's kind of the same for both things. People talk about heading later. Usually people who are bowling reverse are spearing it into your toes. They're bowling really full. They're giving the ball that chance to swing. And so you will see more swing. As I say, you pitch the ball up, it swings more. You'll see that a lot more with reverse because everyone's bowling full. Mitchell Stark's trying to take your toes off. You'll see that ball curve in. Whereas actually it's not swinging much more than it was when you were bowling a length ball. You just don't see it because it doesn't have as much time in the air. So that kind of idea that the ball swings later, it's just the fact that all swing is late swing, if that makes sense. So if you think about the shape of the ball moves through the air, the technical term is it's a parabola. And that means that essentially the distance that it moves sideways is proportional to how long it's in the air squared. So you get this curve rather than it being a straight line. And so for any swinging delivery in general, you get half the sideways movement in the last third of flight. That's my kind of like go-to way of describing a parabola. And so again, the longer you get in the ball, you get like an exponential increase in how much the ball actually swings. So you pitch the ball up, you see a lot more swing happening. Whereas when you actually normalize it for the length, as in take out the effect of being in the air for longer and just look at the force generated, it's actually not that much more. And it's no different from conventional swing. People talk about reverse swing swinging more of the time. It swings a lot less. It just happens at a fuller length and people aren't expecting it and all these other factors that you have to take into account. What's interesting is there's actually an upper limit on how much you can conventionally swing a ball based on the physics, whereas there's slightly less of an upper limit on reverse swing based on the conditions, but you still have to get really, really long way into a ball being very messed up on one side before you can get it to swing even as much as a brand new ball conventionally in reverse. So there's definitely trade-offs between the two of them. And then the last point I'd make on that, I think angles play a massive role. So one of my favorite things is trying to take kind of like cricketisms and turn them into objectifiable facts or whatever it is. So people talk about the ball swinging from the hand or late swing, these kind of cricketing ideas. And I always like to try and put some numbers on them. What does it mean to swing from the hand? What does it mean if the ball is actually swinging late? Can I find any evidence of types of players who are one or the other? And one of the things I always think about is, if you're a type of bowler, say a right arm over bowler, who releases the ball close to off stump and you're swinging the ball away from a right-handed bat, as a batter, you are always watching that ball go away from you. At no point is that ball traveling into you. It's always starting on a straight line and swinging away. So that's quite an easy angle to pick up. If you're a wide of the crease bowler and then you're trying to swing the ball away, at some point that ball is traveling into you, and then at some point it's moving away to you. And you have to judge those up and pick up on those cues earlier in order to react to that in a certain way. It's kind of like the idea of Axar Patel releasing the ball so wide of the crease, but still turning the ball away from you. Well, it's always still coming into you. The angles and the perception there create a reality that's really difficult to face. It's not necessarily something physically different. It's all about angles and perception. So that's another really important factor when thinking about how much the ball swings and how to face it and how effective it is, I think.
Yeah, and the reason that bowlers used to bowl straighter is because we didn't have DRS. And so you wanted to land the ball on off stump and hitting off stump to be able to get that LBW, whereas now you don't need to worry about that. So if you were a young outswing bowler now, you would be much better off to be as wide as possible on the crease and be bowling almost like, as you said, Axar Patel or a wrist spinner or anything like that. My last
and you see it in characteristics with different bowlers from different countries. So English bowlers in general bowl wider on the crease because they're in a condition that swings more compared to a lot of other bowlers. Things like that, right? It's a thing that you grow up and you learn the skills that way.
So women generally swing the ball in more and men generally swing the ball away more. And me and Izzy Westbury have had hours and hours of conversations about this. And if you talk about it online, men just say, oh, but that's because women bowl slower. And that's why they do it. And I'm like, well, I've played a lot of club cricket, and most of the club cricket I've ever played, men still swing the ball away. And every time I come across a woman, they swing it in. Is that something to do with the different body makeups, or have you ever looked into that, or is it something?
So I'm not a
biomechanicist.
I'm going to put that out there. Like I don't study bowling actions and stuff. I can tell you some of the causes. So one of the first things to note is that actually a women's ball is lighter than a men's ball. It's not very much lighter, but it is lighter. So aerodynamically, you're creating a very similar force, but it's acting on a lighter object. Again, going back to my Newton's laws, you have F equals ma, right? So the force on the ball is the mass times the acceleration. Well, if you have the same force and you make the mass smaller, you get more acceleration. The ball swings in a little bit more. So that plays a role. Again, bowling at slower speeds does help you. You need the ball to be less shiny to swing the ball at slower speeds. In terms of the in-swing versus outswing, the only thing that's going to make a difference is where you're pointing that seam, right? So if I'm a male bowler, I'm pointing the ball at second slip, it'll swing away. If I point it at fine leg, it'll swing in. So it's much more around the kind of classic bowling actions that people have naturally and how they're taught. The sort of classic way you always see people teach swing is if you want to swing the ball away, you want to make like a reverse C shape with your arm as you let go of it to get your wrist going across the ball. And if you want to swing the ball in, you create kind of a C shape. Now, it's not an ideal way to teach people how to swing the ball because it involves changing your whole action. But if you look at a lot of female in-swing bowlers, they're very chest on, a lot of high arms, and you're much easier to get your wrist on the inside of the ball. If you're a very slingy bowler, how are you slinging the ball but also getting the seam pointing the other way? It's just not physically
almost
possible.
Impossible. Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why Jimmy was such a master, is that he was able to change his wrist position with no change in his bowling action. He was able to angle the ball to first slip or to fine leg with 99% of the delivery was exactly the same. It was only at the very last minute. Another sort of analogy I have for that is like Roger Federer in his serve, where he was able to basically put the ball either straight down the tee or right out into the corner with the exact same service action. Yeah. And that's your like ideal way of doing things. All you're doing is changing your wrist position at the end. And if you can develop your action to maintain your speed, your seam stability, so not get any wobble in your ball, while shifting your wrist from pointing to second slip to pointing to fine leg, that's how you master the art of swing bowling. And so it's often the natural way in which people develop their bowling action that dictates which type of swing is easiest. And then it's the skill to then go away and work on that, refine that, keep everything that's good about your bowling with your accuracy, your speed, but be able to change that seam position that makes it such a difficult skill.
So you've done all this study, and then we were talking off air about something that I find very interesting. And I was telling you a story that I heard at Sloan about the moving stuff at a baseball ground and it changing it. And you said that there was a theory in English cricket that when Trent Bridge brought the new stand in, the ball stopped swinging. And I then said to you, well, I think the MCG also, when it built its latest stand, the same thing has happened.
Yep.
Is that the next level where someone like you can go into a cricket ground working for a team directly, take their weather machine? And I know people already tried this sort of stuff with betting as well. So it's not just cricket. It's going to be betting markets.
Yeah.
It's going to be performance people like you. But is that the next level of the day before the game, you go in and you take a bunch of diagnostic tests of this ground and you're looking for, okay, so at 10 a.m., for whatever reason, the moisture level is up, and at midday, we get a spike of, sometimes there is a breeze that comes in, or whatever it may be. Is that the next level of what your research is, of trying to work out ground dynamics, aerodynamics, atmospheric pressures, whatever you want to call it, moisture levels in the pitch and how they act? Is that what you think the future is?
Well, I think the future in general is just collecting more information, is getting away from this one-to-one correlation, right? And I talked about all these kind of three things. I still think atmospherics is the third most important. I think we need bowler information before I can start telling you if the increase in wind is going to make much difference to how much you're going to swing the ball in the second session. I need to know if my bowlers are nailing their skills. Like if they're not nailing their skills, and today is just a day where someone's lost their wrist position or whatever, it doesn't make any difference what the weather's doing. We need, it is a part of the equation, but it's just not a massive one. But you can profile grounds. I kind of said to you before, during lockdown in my PhD in 2020, one of the things I did was I basically spent 2 months in lockdown building a bespoke cricket weather station on my girlfriend's dining room table down in Bournemouth when we couldn't leave the house. So she's a doctor, so she was off doing excellent
Real
work
things
during the pandemic, and I was sat at home just tinkering on an electronics bench that I'd set up down there. So when I was able to go back into the lab and kind of restart the studies, one of the things we did was just go and sit in the middle of cricket grounds and measure the atmospherics and try and start to profile what it is around certain grounds that may make them more conducive to swing, based on the understanding that we had that wind was going to be a really big factor. Some of the dynamics, microclimates that you get within certain grounds that may create still air, windy air, turbulent air, whatever it is. We didn't get hugely far, obviously, because if you think about that as a project, spending enough time getting enough weather conditions at enough grounds to be able to profile them is, a ludicrous amount of time. And it was just me and my little box of electronics. So we didn't manage to get there, but we did identify some things that were really interesting. So you look at Trent Bridge, for example, and as I said, when the big stand went up, that's now created an environment where you have the pavilion at one end, you have the big stand at the other, and you essentially have this gap between the stands that goes over the River Trent. And we sat there and measured the wind, and the wind pretty much came over that direction for the entire day, just channeling through these stands and constantly going there. Now, whether that is an increase from what it was before, I don't know. I wasn't able to measure it before they put the stand up, but that change in wind dynamics might be something that maybe means that it's a bit harder to swing the ball at Trent Bridge, because on an averagely windy day, the actual wind inside the stadium is higher, and therefore you have more background turbulence. Those kind of things. And, again, we talked about American sports and the idea of simulating all the weather conditions that you might get within a stadium, taking your 3D model of your stadium and putting it into a simulation to see what the weather would do. I'd love to do that. I'd love to have the time and resources to do that. Sadly, I don't think that's the sort of thing that's going to necessarily happen in the performance industry. It might happen in a research project. As I say, there's some great work still going on in the research field that would be really cool. But I still think we're just missing so much information around the bowlers, possibly even understanding how the ball works, and still talking about putting saliva on white balls to get them to reverse, rather than actually focusing on possibly the thing that matters, which is measuring how rough you can get a white ball legally. There's a reason ball tampering works, right? Is because you're roughing up one side of the ball, and that's how you get the most reverse swing, by getting a side really rough. So, I think I would love to do all of that. For me, the atmospheric stuff, there are definitely advantages to be gained from understanding the atmospherics. Don't get me wrong. How granular and in detail we get, I don't know. I guess we'll see in the next couple of years, 5-10 years. But my main aim is to stop people telling me that when the clouds come out, it's going to swing, and try and reverse some of the damage that Bob Massey has done to our sport, really. So
that's not going to happen. But just before you go, my final question is, can you swing the ball more now than you could when you started this research?
Well, so I myself am a wicketkeeper batsman. So
Well, that is the most useless answer that you could have
know.
given me.
Well, I will say that when I started my PhD, I was like, I have to be able to swing a ball now. Like, I cannot be this self-proclaimed expert and not actually be able to. 40 miles an hour, whatever it is, doesn't matter. And so as soon as I realized, oh, all you need to do is just point your wrist in the right way and make sure you get your seam stable, I was like, I'm going to go work on that. And I can fairly confidently say I can swing a ball in both directions, not well at any sort of pace or with a huge amount of consistency, but I can do it in a way that
in both directions is impressive though. I've always had a natural outswinger, and I don't know how or whatever. And no matter what I did, I could just never get the ball to swing back in. I would drop my shoulder and I'd point my wrist. And
getting the seam point to fine leg, and that's all good.
I've done that.
Arm ball. That's my only other skill. So I used to be a very terrible spin bowler as well. And then all I can do now is bowl arm balls. So I absolutely lovely away drift from a. It doesn't turn at all, completely useless. But the first ball is always an absolute mind blown for the batter because they're expecting some sort of spin, and it's just a slow swinging delivery. And one thing I will add just before I throw this in as a little teaser for maybe people to go and read some of the stuff I've written is that actually one of the cool things about the aerodynamics of swing bowling and some of the stuff I've learned from baseball is actually some of it's really applicable to spin bowling as well. So people talk a lot about drift and getting the ball to move sideways. Actually, there's a lot of more complicated aerodynamics than simply the ball spinning and that making it move. So in baseball, you think of curveballs, right? Where you rotate the ball and that causes the ball to spin. That's something called the Magnus effect. So a rotating body will move sideways. Actually, spin bowlers hardly use the Magnus effect at all. So everything's happening in the wrong direction. So if you think about a baseball curveball, right? It's kind of like a Millinger swing. So you let go of the ball sideways, the ball is flying, saucering. As the ball is curving sideways, it then drifts in. Everyone's seen the Millinger Yorkers. He's awesome as well as an aerodynamic example because he does something very different. Probably could talk to you about Millinger for another hour, but we won't put everyone through that. But in terms of spin bowling, a classical off spin or whatever, again, I'll just turn my lamp down so that everyone can see the ball a little bit better. You're rotating the ball around the seam, right? So you're spinning the ball sideways and then bowling it forward. Yep. That's completely the wrong orientation to get the ball to curve sideways based on the Magnus effect. In fact, I think actually the seam is playing quite a large role on this. Say my supervisor in the lab in Cambridge is doing some cool work looking at this sort of stuff as well. And I've got a little blog out looking at some of the examples that I've seen in cricket where people have different seam positions, but same rotations of the ball and it drifts and some don't. And that's a really, really interesting part of this that I don't think is well understood either.
Yeah. Have you heard of in-to-in off spin?
Is that ball that drifts in and then turns in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Ashwin has talked about that. Gareth Batty talks about that. And they both basically talk about the fact that if you get your arm up over your head, but you're still putting off spin revolutions on it.
It's just where you point the seam. It's just how you change the seam. So classic off spin, if you look at classic off spin and let go of the ball, there'll be a slight tilt on the ball. So the ball is slightly tilted forward, slightly tilted back, and that will drift in and turn away. Drift away and turn in. Your classic Nathan Lyon delivery, perfect example of this. Just go watch slow-mo videos of Nathan Lyon, gets the ball to drift and turn in. If you angle the ball in the opposite direction, I play with an off spinner who drifts the ball in and turns in because he gets his wrist the wrong side of the ball and it drifts in and turns in. So the seam position is massively more important than I think people think when it comes to spin bowling. And that is another thing that I'm really excited to look at in the future. I want to get to the stage where we're doing pitch design like baseball, where we're thinking about how do we make a ball that does this thing that no one does at the moment, that batters aren't expecting. I think I put a post out of it when people were talking about the IPL just being a bowling machine fest. Well, we need to have this same idea that you have in baseball. You start measuring these things around the bowlers. You start being able to design what you want to do, understanding the aero, understanding what you can do with the ball. What happens if you put the rough side at the front? What happens if you put the rough side at the back? What happens if you tilt your... Like Ashwin's an amazing example. He's got these 15 variations because he's just tried things. He has this amazing ball. I definitely put this out on Blue Sky. There was a clip of it where he basically has a arm ball that goes in the wrong direction that he releases out the back of his hand. And he talked about it on Sky, and I can't remember who it was saying, oh, this is a carom ball that you've done here. And he's like, oh, no, it's not a carom ball. This is another variation I've worked on. And he's just found a way of releasing the seam, pointing in a different direction, and then that causing the ball to do something else. And there's so many possibilities that are really underexplored. And that, to me, is the thing I'd love to see more of, the real, getting into the weeds of how do we design a delivery that does this, fast bowlers, spin bowlers, whatever. yeah, and I'm hoping that's where we're going to be in 2 years' time. We're not going to be talking about batter scoring 400 ones. We're going to be talking about 15 variations and all the wickets, and no one can get the ball off the square, despite, again, me personally being a batter.
It's really interesting. You know, me and Benny Howell talk about this stuff quite a bit. And every time I find like new technology or something, I send Benny off to test it for me and be like, you know, get in front of this camera and tell me if it works. And it's really, and the thing is, cricketers have done this before, but without the technology to tell them if it's quite working or not.
Yeah.
And like, they might have had an old ball that they were trying it with in the nets. And if they tried it with a new ball, it would have worked. And
understanding the variables, it's kind of how I talk about, right? You need to measure stuff and then control stuff and then change stuff. Like if you want to bowl a variation, you need to make sure you've got the same ball in the same condition with the rough side of the front, rough side of the back, you know, trying to get the same seam angle. And until we can start measuring this stuff, like you do in baseball, where they have their, you know, Rhapsody machines or whatever it is that sit, the TrackMan machines that sit in their backyard and they throw 500 pitches, and you get all the slow-mo and you can see where it was spinning and where the seam was, all this stuff. How are we meant to reinforce this from a coaching perspective?
Yeah.
How do we go and say, that did something different? Oh, I've got a slow-mo video of it, but it's on my phone and I can't really see what you were doing with the seam. Go try it again. This time they forget to put the ball the right way around and they can't recreate it, and suddenly that moment is lost. So that's kind of, you know, where I'm hopeful that the game goes in the future is just that measurement of bowling technique and really pushing the innovation forward.
I think maybe the most important thing in the future is like an IPL owner to come in and get artificial clouds seeded above the ground just to help their swing bowlers, and for you to be in the background going, no! Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Bob Massey dartboard just throwing darts at him. Should get that in my background, really, didn't I?
Thanks for coming on, mate.
No, thank you. It's been great. Cheers, Jared. Appreciate it.
It took God and the demon to build international cricket, but don't tell Johnny Best that. 1882, Australia had played one test in England against the god W.G. Grace, and they sucked. So they were playing him again, and it was a tough wicket. But England was in front, so Australia was desperate for a third innings lead. At number 8 was young all-rounder Sammy Jones. After a routine single, he walks down to do some gardening on the pitch. Grace whips off the bails and appeals. The ball wasn't dead, Jones was run out. The Australians were furious. In fact, some of the English players were also furious. But what Grace said went, and the umpires had already given it. Next in was Fred Spofforth. He was known as the demon fast bowler. He was furious, and he let England know exactly what was coming next, which was maiden. There's 12 maidens. I can't count them all. England only needed 85 to win. W.G. Grace made 32. England only 77. That was the test where the Ashes began. Buy my book, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire, on Amazon today.